Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. Today is Monday, December 13th, 2021, and today's show, the first hour, will be a replay of my interview with Richard Moss, author of Inside Out Healing, among other things. And Michael and Jeannie, or Michael, or Michelle will be here for the second hour.
And I generally like to just start out with a question like, can you tell us how you got into the work you do and what drives your passion for it? And then we just let a conversation happen.
Sure. How did I get into this work? Synchronicity, things that happen that you don't expect to happen, that are like the breadcrumbs into the labyrinth and so forth. So I studied medicine. I went to medical school in New York City. Then I was coming out for my internship, and we were driving cross country with all I owned, which was next to nothing, in a rented van. A man joins us at our campsite. He's not wearing very much, bearded guy. And when I was traveling with two friends, two women, and they went to sleep. We had a bed rolled out on the side of the van. And he just said to me, of course, what the purpose of life is. And I went, what? No. And he said, well, it's really to learn to love. And then he told me that he was a member of a Sufi order and had been a Sufi for a long time. What was so strange was that it was dark of night, and he walked up with firewood, and I never did see the car. And then he went back to his car, apparently. And then I got into my internship. I finished the internship. Then I was in my residency, starting out in the psychiatry residency, and I heard two of the older residents talking about a new meeting of seekers after truth. And I went, oh, I'm interested. It was a longer conversation with that gentleman at the campfire. And so I met Claudio Naranjo, who was a psychologist from Chile. And this was the San Francisco Bay Area. And I was on a path. I began to learn to meditate and other things. And that path kept unfolding. I got introduced to the people at the Los Angeles Center for the Healing Arts, which were a pioneering group of Jungian analysts and psychiatrists. And they were they knew how little we really knew about illness and cancer and what's typically called the mind-body connection. Well, long story short, I started deeper on a path that eventually took me out of medicine. I had an experience that changed me utterly, at least it showed me that there's a dimension of reality that we don't usually explore. And that was when I was 30. And then I began to do this, what I've been doing now, which is sitting with people in groups, primarily in groups. In fact, COVID is for the first time really changed my focus from groups to individuals and couples. And so the essence of what changed in me, in the language I would use now, is that where we suffer and where all people suffer is within a structure that we call me or I or self with a little s. And in that structure, which a baby's not born with, which is why I think Jesus says you have to be like a little child. I don't think he's talking about just innocence. And I think he's talking about there's still no, the baby hears, but there's no hearer. It sees, but there's no seer. And it takes 7, 8, 9, 10 years of development before that self-system is really consolidated. And in that miraculous first 8 years, let's say 9 years, we manage to overcome the traumas, the bad mirroring, the pain of our parents, the failures of their relationships. And it's always a spectrum from really the best that you could hope from parents to really some pretty hideous circumstances. But we managed to become me. We managed to become I, and that self-system dominates us for the rest of our lives. And within that, there's a thing we could call the ego. And for me, the ego is typically meant by mind, body, the mental thinking processes, like our beliefs about ourselves, our beliefs about others, the nature of what we select from the past, from our memory, to justify our present moment emotional reaction or something. See, I don't really think at the level of me or I, we have a past. We have the past that serves our anger or the past that serves our happiness. We select whatever memory supports the mood or the emotional reaction or in the present moment. And that's what the mandala of being was about. It was about this mental emotional link is what dominates people. It's the source of suffering. You don't suffer because you have physical pain or you're getting old. You suffer because you say, I hate this, or I don't want this, or you talk about yourself in the negative. I'm not good enough. And these are all thoughts. I'm a failure. I didn't try hard enough. You failed me. The blame cycle. These are all thoughts, and every one of those thoughts simultaneously, instantaneously creates an emotion: anger, hope, resentment, bitterness. And that's what we see in our world. We see people in these structures, and they have awareness within their structure, the awareness to improve themselves in athleticism or playing the piano or in anything else, the awareness to join a particular group and be in service to that. I mean, our awareness is enormous of everything from, look at what we've created, from music to architecture to science. But we usually don't get into a deeper kind of awareness, an awareness that's really linked to the body in the present moment. And so the way I language it is, by 8, 9 years old, the assemblage point of consciousness is me. And if it never changes, that's as far as we go. But there is a possibility of a transformation, a true change that's profoundly healing. And that moves the assemblage point of consciousness to awareness. So for me, consciousness is a relationship. This is what we do, my wife and I, and for many, many years. It's 46 years for me now, since I was 30. 44 years, but I was dabbling already before I was 30, and just sitting with people and shifting from conversation at the level of the ego to the possibility of a relationship with fear, as opposed to all the thoughts about it, all the planning to be safe, a relationship to loneliness, instead of all the thoughts that reinforce that, a relationship to sensation. So that kind of awareness, when the assemblage point is capital A awareness or capital C consciousness, is always in the present moment. And so it's not in time, and it doesn't have an agenda. Whereas as a me, as Richard, functioning at that level, assemblage point me, our consciousness, our awareness is always strategic. We do things to get a result. And if we talk about self-awareness practices, mindfulness, meditation, people will say, I had a bad meditation. But that means they're in the past remembering an experience they didn't like. Or they say, oh, it was so wonderful, I went deep. That means they had a pleasant experience they do like, which is going to set them up for saying in the future, oh, this wasn't a particularly good meditation. But if consciousness is truly a relationship, if we can teach ourselves that, if we can dig deep enough and say, wait a minute, I say it sometimes this way because it surprises people. What are the feelings that have never felt safe in you? Has fear ever felt safe in you? Have you ever felt anger without thinking? Is it possible to be angry without first thinking? And what's underneath anger, if anger happens a lot in your life? What's underneath fear, if fear happens a lot in your life? Is there maybe something deeper? And what if we made those deeper feelings safe in us? How could I possibly do that? Well, you learn in the present moment to come into your body and start to recognize what you feel, and you begin to learn to hold it with compassion and love. And those words are misleading in a way. They're pointers. What I say is, you'll see my bandaged hand. I just had surgery yesterday for carpal tunnel. I say, in the present moment, how you're presencing, how you touch, what you're experiencing determines what you're experiencing. So if you don't like what someone's saying to you, right, in that moment, if you don't like it, you're going to fight or withdraw. You're going to react. You're going to judge. If you can sit there and wait, oh, that person just caused me to feel this. That's so interesting. I know that feeling. And you take responsibility for the feeling activated by that other person in you, activated in you, not by the other person. See, the self-system at me says, you make me feel this way, or you do this to me. that's a rough, very rough outline of 45 years of growth and change and working with people and living my own path. I truly know that I'm not Richard in the sense of me, and that I am in a functional and in the world sense. I truly know that I'm the relationship with my experience. And how I touch loneliness is how I experience it. How I hold fear. How do you make fear safe in you? Well, because you'd say, fear makes me feel unsafe or terrified. And I'd say, you're absolutely right. At the level of me and the self-system, that's what fear does. But what about fear itself? What is fear? It's certainly our first teacher of survival. Look at all the animals. They're alert, they're alert, they're alert. But it doesn't serve us now, fear.
One of the things that I saw in your work is this clear distinction between, so many of us when we're talking, dealing with other people, we interchange the idea of the word or the thought feeling and the thoughts about emotion. They're the same. My feelings and my emotions are the same for a lot of people. And you try to draw a clear distinction between those two, whereas emotion relates to the effect that I feel when I experience when I put thoughts to these energy flows, right? Can you say a little bit more about that, how you distinguish between this word feeling and this word emotion?
Yeah. Simply, in the way that I'm making the distinction, emotion is the feeling or the sensation caused by a thought or a reaction to a perception. But feeling is a mode of consciousness that's quite distinct from thinking. So this constant looping between the mental and the emotional, constant. When a person finds themselves sitting and looking at the ceiling at night and just rehashing something over and over again, I know that what they're doing is, that's creating anxiety, or that's creating fear, that's creating sleeplessness. And then they'll have stories about sleeplessness. But what I know is that underneath that is a feeling that hasn't been met, and it's trying to come forward. Often in the middle of the night's a great time for that, because we tend to be more vulnerable. So feeling as a mode of consciousness gives you information in the present moment. It's very interesting that Buddha basically said consciousness for human being is sensation. In other words, consciousness isn't an abstract word. For me, consciousness is a relationship. It's a ceaseless interaction relationship. And that relationship is occurring in the present moment. At that level, waves could happen. A woman contacted me some months after her son committed suicide. She had worked with me for a number of years. She had been in what I call a mentoring program, where I take relatively small groups of people, 12 to 20, 16 people, for 7 days, twice a year for 3 years, which is long enough to be with any teacher. And we worked a lot on her son and his troubles, and her stories about her son, her stories about herself as a failed mother, her stories about her husband as not showing up, her stories about the institutions, that are supposed to help at the schools and the social, so she lived in the anger of that, and she lived in the judgment and the anger all the time. And we worked and worked and worked until she understood that all of that anger, all of that judgment, all of this, that was the poison. So the emotions poison you, even the ones you like, because they set you on a line for their opposite. I mean, people will talk about hope. Hope and fear are parents. They're like heads and tails of a coin. And trust is a very different emotion. Trust is a feeling, a true feeling. I'm in relationship to myself now. I can always be in relationship to myself. Things may get difficult in the future, but things have been difficult before. And I've always been able to be present in myself. So trust is, or faith, if you will. God doesn't abandon us. The reality is profound and deep, and love doesn't abandon us. And we find our way to that, and then we have faith that wherever we are in the future, no matter what happens, I still have that relationship with Source, or I still have that relationship with myself. So to me, things like trust and forgiveness and humility and compassion, those are true feelings that emerge from getting more and more grounded in our bodies and present. Whereas he doesn't love me, anger, or he doesn't love me, sadness. I should do something. I should leave. fear. He doesn't love me. He should love me. I'm not good enough. I've had people, women in particular, that are so incredibly high functioning and very successful, but deep down they have this core belief they're not good enough. And I always say to them, and what does that create? And they said, well, it makes me heavy. It makes me work harder. It drives me to keep doing better. But what's the feeling? What's the actual feeling that's underneath the belief you're not good enough? Because it's just a judgment. You're not good enough. So feelings are like the language of the present moment. They're like music, ever changing. If you start to feel fear and you're open to it, then it becomes vulnerability. And if you stay vulnerable, then you become much more receptive, much more intuitive, and much more heartful. And so there's no bottom to the relationship with these darker, difficult feelings. You go deeper and deeper, and the deeper you go with the fear, I often say fear is love's ally. If you have two people that are afraid to get closer to each other, that's the limit of how much they can love each other. But if they face the fear and hold the fear, then they'll risk deeper relationship. So love says, fear, fear is what shows you that love is worth fighting for, that love is worth working for. You can't bow to fear and have love. You can have a narrow little slice of love for your grandchild or your grandchildren or your own children or some of your children, but you can't. Wherever there's fear, that's the threshold of love. Wherever there's distrust, that's the threshold of love. So that differentiation of emotion is always created by thinking, and that's the only way I would think of an emotion. So anger, resentment, bitterness, judgment, hope, self-importance, self-defeat, all of that is mind-made, thought-made. And most of the time, if you can recognize I'm telling myself a story about the other person called he doesn't love me, or she doesn't care, or on and on, then the moment you realize it's a story and that it's making you unhappy, and you relax and come back to your present moment breath, come back to this moment, then you realize that person is just like you. They're the victims of the emotions created by their thinking. And you don't have to defend yourself from that person. You can be present with them. They may or may not be people you want to get closer to, but often they're people like your parents or your spouse, and it's a pretty good idea to stop the stories and the emotions.
And so with that, you're basically, without mentioning the word or describing it, you're basically describing the process of working with the mandala of being, that model you created where this present moment, you call it this focused spaciousness, and I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that as an experience, but that's the center point. And when I'm in that, there is no story, and there's an entirely different experience of my energetic presence and my safety. And if I get into a story about you or me or past or future, then I'm going to create all those emotions you were just talking about, right? Good, bad, or otherwise.
Right. It took me a long time. I guess I became conscious of the notion of the mandala model around 1996 because I kept asking myself a question: why am I so clear when I'm with a group of people and I'm focusing that group and I'm listening to people and I don't become emotionally engaged? And then I go home and have an argument with my wife, or distance myself or feel judgmental, or what am I doing differently? And I would contemplate, what am I doing differently? And that's when, way back, when I went through this experience of fundamental change, I didn't know what was happening to me, but thank God I had studied medicine, and I'd studied some psychiatry. I knew I wasn't psychotic. I knew it wasn't a seizure. I knew this, but to center myself without understanding even that what I was doing, I was sitting there and going, now your mind is in the past, remembering how you were. Now your mind is in the future, anticipating that this will never stop and you can't bear it. Now you're judging yourself because you think maybe you're weak or something's wrong. And I just kept talking to myself, literally talking to myself out loud or silently, just trying to understand what my mind was doing. So fast forward from 1977 to 1996, why am I different at home with my wife than when I'm working? And suddenly I'm walking around We've got this beautiful Tibetan carpet on the floor of the gathering space. It's here now, in this place. And it has a mandala in the center, a very simple one. And I'm talking to this group of people about an insight. And I'm standing in the center of the mandala, and they said, when I'm working with you, I'm much closer to the center, like when I'm rock climbing, like when I'm dancing, like when I'm skiing. I'm in that zone. My mind isn't in time. It's not purposive. It's not strategic. It's just what I'm doing, the inner and the outer are kind of the same thing. I'm unified. And when I'm teaching, when I'm working, and there's this presence in me, I'm doing that. But I go home and I get into me, Richard, the ego, the historic Richard, with his problems with his mother and all of that. And I'm now judging. So I'm walking around the mandala. I'm walking over to the 9 o'clock. If you thought of yourself as sitting right in the dead center of a clock, and to your left is 9 o'clock, and to your right is 3 o'clock, and in front of you is 12 o'clock, behind you is 6 o'clock. When you're in those moments of flow, like I was just describing, you're in the center, right? You're not in stories about yourself. But, if you're going down a fairly challenging ski slope and you suddenly say, boy, I'm really doing great, then suddenly just the thought is,
here comes the ground. Yeah.
That's exactly right. So just to give people the experience, you just imagine you're sitting in the center of a circle. And you've chosen to come into the present moment where you're really aware of your breath, you're in your body, you've stepped out of time, and to your left over at 9 o'clock are all the ways you judge yourself, positively or negatively, all the ways you inflate yourself or deflate yourself. I'm better than him. I'm not as good as she is. I'm not smart enough. I deserve more. All the I, me stuff. It's all over to your left. And that's going on in your ego, in your self-system. But that's how you're in the middle now. Over to your right at 3 o'clock is all the judgments of other people and all the judgments of everything. Like for a logger and you're out in the forest, trees are a commodity to be cut down. For an environmentalist, trees are a precious resource to be protected and cherished and cared for. So different stories, because people have different values and different, things that they're doing. And what we know is that a baby isn't born with me, you consciousness, subject, object consciousness, that takes a long time to develop and stabilize. So we have that notion of subject and object, me, you, and oh my goodness, it's a downpour. I can hear it. So behind you are all these things. It's a deep ground of memory. So I call those the past stories. So that's the positive nostalgia, the negative nostalgia. So take, for instance, if you're angry at someone, right? And then you look into the past and you remember all the things that person did that had gotten you angry before. Or you look into the past and you remember how your father treated your mother, or your mother treated your father. And you select from your memory whatever justifies you being angry, right? So now we have me, you stories in the back. We have this ground of the past, but it's not really memory. I mean, it's memory, but it's psychological memory, and it's constantly changing, and it's being selected. It's not right remembering. It's not, this is the actual situation, because at the time that memory is imprinted, you have a particular consciousness, and so you imprint it in a certain way. Then we know that those kinds of memories, especially strong emotional memories, are reimagined every time you have them, and they're reimagined according to the mood of the moment. In that sense, there's no true past at the level of the ego. There's just what justifies my anger, my sadness, my fear, my resentment, my bitterness, my neediness. And in front of you at 12 o'clock are all the ways you can imagine the future, but we actually know that nobody can know the future, so that the future is truly imagined. But when we're me, we don't actually have a future. What do we imagine? We imagine some form of the past that might be better, and that leads to hope. We imagine some form of the past that could be worse, and that leads to fear. And so hope and fear, we swing between those. And those are the stories in the future. And if you look around at the world, at people, you go, wait a minute, what? There's almost a tsunami of fear in our world now. And that leads us to a different subject, which is why are we so susceptible to fear? And how does the left brain and right brain and the nervous system really work, and other kinds of things. But that aspect of my work that has to do with presencing and being in the body and feeling, the mental emotional process is stories about myself, stories about others, what I'm selecting from the past, and how I'm imagining the future. And that creates the present moment activation in your body of fear, anxiety, heaviness, contractedness, hopefulness. But that circle around you, that assemblage point is the consciousness of the me that a baby doesn't have, and that then most of us never let go of. And when you look at these epidemics of fear, you realize that if you don't start with really something that's true, your mind will create a rationality for anything. I mean, you can start from, what is racism? Blacks are inferior. There were, intellects arguing, hundreds of years ago, African Americans, in those days they were just Africans, or black people, they're only good, the slave people and people in Europe, and then, they're only good for labor and having babies. Of course, it's nonsense. But if you start there, then you select the evidence all the time, the way you look at people. And then if you treat them a certain way because of your belief, then it's just an endless looping of hopeless stupidity. And you're trapped inside of it. And you don't have any freedom from it unless grace comes along and whacks you on the head, like that song, Amazing Grace.
Talk about a little bit more about these two words, focus, spaciousness, and that center of that conscious awareness of the now. How did you get to the focus spaciousness concept?
Well, how do you describe a state? The problem is language gets to a point where you either have to be in poetry or you kind of have to be singing or something. But the state of being truly in your body in the present moment with your mind silent, not activated, is a state of precise perception, right? That is, you see colors vividly in a way you hadn't seen them before. You hear sounds vividly in a way that's clearer and more distinct than before. You feel yourself penetrated by the natural environment, the natural order. In fact, your body responds to just walking in the forest with a drop in your cortisol levels, your stress hormone levels. And, so you're so awake. Everything's so sharp and clear. And in that sense, focused and precise. But there's no beginning and no end. It's not outside you or inside you. There's no you, really. The witnessing consciousness steps into the background. So when I try to describe the state, as you move away from the me, you, past, future dynamic, toward that center, which athletes know to a certain point, when you look at lives of exceptional athletes, you look at the quality of focus that they can have, how they can tune everything else out, and yet they can see, the context in which they're performing, whether it's Tom Brady as a quarterback or, some great golfer like Tiger Woods, everything else is excluded. They're very, very focused, and they're spacious in the context of that activity, but they're not spacious in the context of day-to-day life necessarily. I don't know them personally, but we all know that. People who function very high in one level, exceptionally high, way, way above the norm, but are so limited in other ways. When you really are grounded in the present moment, how do you describe it? So I call it focused spaciousness. Sometimes I call it relaxed readiness, because most of the time when people relax, they get sleepy and unfocused, right? But if they're ready, they're on guard, they're tense, right? But what if you were absolutely ready? Kind of the apocryphal image of the master martial artists, I've heard stories where, the great martial artists, when they're judging others, will sometimes see two contestants in front of them who haven't yet moved. They're preparing themselves, but they have, and they'll declare one of them the victor because they felt one of them's mind move. And if the mind moved, you'd lose. You had to move without mind. So how do you move without mind? Well, gymnasts do that. Athletes do that all the time. And in martial arts, you're taking the contemplative, meditative world into a martial, physical, athletic domain. And as I said, these are kind of apocryphal stories. But so when I was trying to language what it's like to be focused and spacious, so if we have an audience now and people want to, if they're not driving or something, if they close their eyes and just take a position in yourself and you say, here am I. I'm at the beginning of myself. Everything, there's only the now. Probably the most important, profound insight any human being can have, that there's truly only the now. And what do you experience in the now? You experience your breathing. So as you're breathing in, you just feel your body breathing, but really feel it, not spectator from your head. Breathe out and just feel the body, that sensation, the coolness in your nostril, the softening in your chest, the softening in your belly, and the next in-breath. And with each out-breath, just keep relaxing without getting sleepy. So there are practices that are at the heart of everything I do that are about cultivating and stabilizing the ability to have an anchor in the present moment, which is sensation. So, for example, all the trials and tribulations of life, but all the time you were breathing. And when you're thinking about the people you're angry with, or you're fearing the outcome of some really disastrous situation and so forth, do you also remember your breathing? Because if you have that anchor of your body breathing in the present moment, you won't get deeply lost in an emotion like fear. You won't go into the future and get lost in distrust and anxiety and terror. So you have to develop an anchor in the present moment in the body. That's the very first step of awareness practice, consciousness practice. And it's not taught in psychiatry. It's not taught in psychology. Though right now we're weaving together the mindfulness practices, the awareness practices, and into our psychological thinking.
Those practices, as you're talking about, that we can actually get better and better with practice of identifying the thoughts that pull us out of, as you said, if you're in the moment and you're aware of your breathing, you won't go into fear. And then my mind said, yes, unless I think, oh my gosh, I can't breathe. And then I pour a lot of thoughts into the sensations and I start to catastrophize it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad you mentioned these athletes that get into the zone and they sink basketball shot after basketball shot and they don't know why. Or I think of Larry Bird when you were talking about the focused spaciousness, because he would go on a basketball court and not look and pass right to his player who was, inches away from an opponent. And he had that awareness when he was on the court that I think it has to be akin to what you're talking about, that we can develop in this now awareness, this now present moment experience.
Well, yeah, and it's often called meditation practice, or nowadays mindfulness practice, or contemplative prayer. But you do have to practice. If you want to stop being afraid and angry, you have to bring yourself into the present moment so that you can see what you're thinking is doing.
Yeah, how you're creating the anger or the fear. Yeah.
Only you do. Nobody else creates anger or fear in you. I mean, there are people who manipulate fear in other people purposely because it gives them power. But they can't manipulate an awake or aware person. They just simply can't. And the ones who are manipulated and become angry, they want to join with a group of similarly angry people. Or the ones that go to church and create a community of fellowship. That's a much better community, especially if you can broadly allow people of different religious faiths or different religious sects the same respect you would give to your own people. But that's sometimes a step too far. But right now, historically right now, we see that social media allows fear to be spread baselessly, without factual base. And it's so difficult to step into it. And because whoever's listening to us now, I don't know what they've chosen to believe. I'm astonished at how many people don't want to be vaccinated, even well-educated people. I'm astonished. But then again, I'm a doctor, or was a doctor, and I've studied that, and I understand what the history of vaccines are and the evolution of them. But when you go online, and it's an experiment, it's mind manipulation, it's this, or, and you realize none of that's true. It's also like saying the election was stolen when it wasn't. But more and more, if you seed doubt into people and they listen to their own minds, the only ground they have is the emotion of the belief. And if that ground is anger, then they build a world around anger. If that ground is fear, they build a world around fear. And often people that are angry don't realize that they're actually very, very afraid. And people that move into anger very quickly, there's usually something that's hunting them much deeper, a deep sorrow, a deep, deep sadness, or a deep fear. And that's never been addressed. And unfortunately, it's that level of consciousness where most of us live, where we vote, where we make and pass our laws. It's scary. It's scary because we can lead ourselves to misery collectively. And you can never be safe until whatever inside of you feels unsafe, you learn to hold. And you can't do that without an awareness practice. You just can't.
Well, one of the things that I really appreciated about your book, this Inside Out Healing, and I want to mention that people can find you at richardmoss.com, MOSS.com. And when you talk about these very intense feelings, you call them abysmal feelings, and the willingness in your work to go there with people. So it's not just, I'm not looking at the mandala of being or the Richard Moss work for this light stuff. If you've got somebody with a little bit of anxiety or depression, they can go use this work. You're looking at the full experience of us as humans and talking about, what you do with using the same mandala, but, adding a few stop signs here and there to remind me to stop producing thought about this intense feeling or experience and being with it. And how more and more, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but, this My Stroke of Genius, the woman who...
Yes, Jill Bolte Taylor.
Jill Bolte Taylor has been talking lately about the research that says if you will just be with and not fight, push away, or grab onto an emotion, it's going to move through you in about 90 seconds in terms of the neurological system and this energy flow. And so, that's the kind of thing that came to mind when I was reading your work and using the mandala for these more intense feelings.
You remind me that I started an anecdote and didn't finish it. I was talking about the woman whose son was troubled and all the work she did with me about her anger. Well, she called me and she basically said a couple of months ago, I was driving my car. I got a call that my son had committed suicide. And I had about 30 minutes before I'd get home and the phone would ring and I'd start to have to organize and this and that. And she said, what was so extraordinary in that half hour? And she said, I opened myself to feelings, and it was the beginning of opening to them. She said, I would never wish on another human being, but I never for a moment suffered. And she said, because if I'd done every story, I've worked with you on every story, every judgment, every form of anger. So instead I could just feel. And so we talk about abysmal feelings. Grief can be incredibly abysmal, but if you don't allow real grief, you'll just go to guilt or you'll go to anger. He didn't do this, they didn't do that, or I didn't do enough, And once you're in the disguise of guilt and anger, the hiding place of guilt and anger, you're not grieving anymore, because grieving is one of the most intelligent and essential of all human emotions, because it's where we have to allow a constant play. 1 minute you can be laughing hysterically and really laughing, and the next minute you're sobbing in despair, and it's like 50 different pieces of music are playing inside of you, and you will recognize all of them for a split second, but you can't grab any of them. And this, so Jill Bolte Taylor is right, it'll pass through you, but grief won't pass through you in 90 seconds. Grief will, there are so many reminders, so many things that call you back in memory and mind, and both of those systems, the aware system and the me system, they overlap, and they're working in parallel. But you can learn. You can learn to stop poisoning yourself with your own thinking, and you turn toward that simple breathing process I was describing. You make a friendship between your consciousness and the sensation in your body of breathing. They become, and so that link between the sensation that's always there and your awareness becomes an anchor in the present moment. And with that anchor, you turn toward the fear. You turn toward the sorrow. You turn toward the darkest despair, and you turn toward it, and you touch it softer and softer and softer. How do you touch it? With your breath, with awareness. It's in your body. It's not out there somewhere. You're feeling it. It's there. And if you turn toward it and you just touch it softly, it will become spaciousness. Most of these deepest and darkest feelings are disguised forms of love. They're condensed forms of spacious consciousness. And you have to keep touching them until they teach you. Everybody wants to control fear, feel better, control sadness, but you learn in the present moment to touch fear, and suddenly you feel spacious and relaxed. And then you go, wait a minute, what happened? And then the next time you try to do the same thing again, that doesn't work. So you realize this sensation called fear or despair will open into spaciousness, will open into love when you learn how to touch it, which means the you that's touching is the problem. So basically, fear teaches your self system how to relax until the fear can relax in you. Then you begin to develop a body of love, which is a living current of love and joy. And it takes years and years for that to happen in you. But you can't fix it with just medication. When things are extreme, you may be able to diminish them enough. But long-term transformation, long-term healing is the work of a lifetime. And there's really no end to it.
And that experience in the moment is just the movement of life. And to be able to stay open to that rather than try to grab it and hold it or push it away is this touching gently that you're talking about. And it can be taught. I can learn it, and I can strengthen my ability to recognize when I'm in the grasping or pushing away or I'm in the open state.
Mm-hmm. My wife and I just did a 3-day, we call it deep work, but it's an introduction to this work. But probably half the time we were guiding some form of meditation, some form of internal self-referencing, in the body relaxing, wanting. Because what people don't realize is the self-system is always wanting. It wants to feel better. It wants to understand. It wants to improve. It wants a result, right? But the deeper consciousness is just touching. And if you touch fear wanting, that's like saying to fear, I don't want you this way, but I want you another way, which is like turning to a child and saying, don't be the way you are. And what good does that do? All you do is the child will either suppress itself or, it'll do one of three things. It'll hide from you, or it'll fight you, or get, angry and rebellious, or it will do everything you want to please you.
I remember listening to Krishnamurti in a talk saying what we really need to do is embrace our negative emotions the way we would a wounded child.
Exactly. As if you were the wisest of grandparents, right?
Toward your own feeling, yeah.
Toward your own feelings, right? You take them like a child that's been terribly wounded, and feels deeply unsafe, and you stay with that. You consistently breathe with that inside yourself until that child teaches you what it needs to feel safe. So if it's fear, it teaches you how to touch it, how to presence with it, so that the fear is no longer fear. And then it becomes spaciousness, or it becomes openness, or it becomes, and it even can become love, almost in an instant sometimes. Well, really in an instant sometimes. And how are we going to ever make people safe? You can't pass enough laws to make yourself safe. You can't blame enough people for a bad world and then think that if you contain those people, then you'll be safe. And I mean, if you can't make yourself safe through a relationship with what you feel, you'll never actually be safe. Are you expecting your husband to make you safe, or your wife to make you safe, or your children to fix your life, or your job to fix your life, or money to make you safe? all of them can contribute to something good or not good in you, but it's really up to you. It's up to each of us. We're 100% responsible for our reactions. See, that's a path. If the people that are listening to us simply say, okay, well, how do I live this? Then I'll say, you have to decide what your awareness is in service to. In other words, you have to decide why you're here. If you decide that creation itself was an act of love, that, as Jesus taught, God is a God of love. If you decide that love is the purpose of why you're here, now your awareness is going to teach you all the ways you stop loving you see? And then now you have a purpose. But if you don't have a pole star that you're steering by with your awareness, then you'll steer by the shame you feel one moment, the anger you feel another moment, the anxiety you feel another moment, the hopefulness you feel another moment. You'll be bouncing all over the place without any anchor in yourself, in your body. But the moment you say, wait a minute, I'm here to love, it's kind of, to me, less abstract than saying I'm here to love God, or waiting for God's love to fix you. God's love doesn't fix you unless you turn around and love God, because how you touch that determines
your experience, right?
God's touch. You are the creator of the God you believe in. The attributes of that God, which are your belief, create how you choose to live your life. Because other than that, nobody has ever known anything about God. So if someone like Jesus, if Buddha says, there is no independent origination, everything is karmic, everything's related to everything else. And as you get into the present moment sensation, and you look at the myth of the Buddha under the tree of life in his part of the world, which is the Bodhi tree, it's everything that came at him, he let it pass through. Everything he came at him, let it pass through. But in order to let it pass through, he had to keep relaxing himself. He had to keep letting go of the me. And when Jesus says God is love, he's basically saying, okay, now you change the purpose of your life, and now your self-awareness is in service to how do I stop love? Well, and what fear plus self-interest are the absolute, that will stop love every time. Self-interest plus fear, no more love.
And the point is, just because as you say it, my mind is going, why is he talking about stopping love? And the point is, if I understand how I'm stopping the flow of these life energies through me and my ability to experience love, then I can choose something else and allow that flow and be in the experience of love and have an experience of myself in the world that's dramatically different.
Imagine two people come to make their vows. There's always, usually, most of the time, marriage vows. There's usually someone representing a religion, therefore kind of a symbolic connection to God, and you make your vow in front of God. But to me, the vow is not to love that person till death do us part, but to love with that person, right? Because transactions between me and you, I'll love you if you love me, Right now, I love you, and I can imagine nothing but a wonderful world in the future. But there's a whole lot of shadow in us, and pretty soon the one you love becomes the source of a whole lot of problems. And so the transactions never work. Not when love is, you have to have a relationship to love itself. So, if you do your vow, you say, okay, I'm promising to use every bit of who I am and my awareness and everything I can learn about myself to love with you, right? And now when I see that my mind is dividing me from you, do I want to keep going down that road of divided mind? Because as soon as you divide your mind, then you project division into the world and you
experience it. Yeah.
Well, exactly. So that's antithetical to love. The divided mind is antithetical to love. If you divide your mind, what will then happen is you'll end up with your category of people who you feel safe with, but you'll also have the whole category of people you don't feel safe with. So there's no end to warfare at that level. There's no end to the misery of the world at that level. And love is choosing us. Love is always trying to find us. I mean, anyone who's observed their life has seen, boy, love has been seeking for me. I've just gotten in the way with booze or drugs or self-pity or bad habits. And And then when you get out of the way, life starts to change. And I'm very aware that when we say these things and we're using words, it sounds so much easier than it is to learn to really love with fear. To have a partner that can make you feel so wonderful and at the same time make you so scared, or so. And then what does this mean to love with someone else? What does it mean to want to come back to the center of the mandala and stop the me, you, past and future stories and start again right now? I often say to people after our gatherings, retreats, go home and on the mirror in your bathroom and on your refrigerator, everywhere where you say, who I am begins now. If I'm angry, that means I'm telling myself a story. So find out what that story is. If I'm afraid, it means that's a feeling I need to turn to and stop the stories and maybe activating it and see what's really there. It might not be really fear. It might be deep sorrow. Sometimes when you stop the stories that are creating fear, what's underneath is just spaciousness and ease. You just don't know because we protect ourselves from our depths with this mental, emotional, mind-body connection. And that's not the deeper mind-body connection because the deeper, the big mind and body, that's a body of love. It's literally a current of joy and love in your body. And it's always there. So the moment you sit down, there it is. When you're doing and you're focused, it's always there, but your intention's somewhere else. And when you make the image of Larry Bird, knowing how to make a pass without looking at the person, or, I used to watch the Chicago Bulls with Michael Jordan, and you could see the energy change. Michael could change the energy field of the team and of himself in that context. I'm sure that in many other contexts, he's struggles with life like everybody else. I believe I read he had a gambling problem at some point in time. But he was a remarkably aware and awake person on the court. So was Larry Bird. And sometimes we're better coaches than we are practice, players. In my life, I tried to be a really good coach, but live the path myself every single moment. And to have found this path and now to be 74 and know that there's nothing that ever can come to me in the future that I'll meet it with a yes as best I can every time. So there's nothing ever to be afraid of. And the future is always going to be stolen. Sooner or later, you'll lose your money, you lose your health, someone you love is gone. The future that you imagine, it can be stolen in a blink. So the only thing you have is your relationship to yourself right now. And the deeper that is, the closer you are to everyone else. So it's not this, I'm going to have a relationship with myself, and that's kind of narcissistic right. And exclusive. It's not that at all.
Right. This is in that recognition that we're all connected. It's all energy, and just because I can't perceive those energies with my senses doesn't mean they're not there and that I don't live and swim in them. So,
yeah, and you feel as your mind gets calmer, your body feels those energies. The body is this it's the most intelligent part of us, and the feeling intelligence is the next most intelligence, and the thinking is the least intelligent because it can be led astray by anything. You can build crazy realities with thinking and not believe they're crazy because they seem logical to you. There's so many good experiments that demonstrate how crazy our left brain is, the part that's representing with words, compared to the right brain, which is presencing right now all the time. And I mean, we could talk about all these things for long periods of time, but when I sit down with someone, I'm aware of a lifetime of practice in myself. I'm aware of the kinds of feelings that are pushing people into the thinking they have, the wounds of childhood that they're deeply needing to heal. Because one of the things about the intelligence of who we are is that we will try to resolve conflict and heal all our lives. Somehow we will try.
Yeah, we'll try to make sense of it. And I love that you've given people a model in at least these two books of yours, The Inside Out Healing and The Mandala of Being, that they can begin to start working with that on their own if they choose. I realize that
was one of those books. Those books were about, you can do this yourself. If you read these things and think about them and then make it your own practice, it's life-changing.
Well, I thank you so much for joining us today and sharing as generously with your time as you have. And I look forward to following your work.
And I want to thank you because you're giving your time to a good cause. And I feel your clarity and heart. And they have a good champion in there.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Do be well, and I will check in with you again in about a year and see if you've got any new projects we should discuss.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Thank you.